Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's In Conversation event hosted by the National Federation of Cypriots in the UK. Tonight, I'm delighted to be joined by Dame Janet Paraskeva, Tom Toumazis MBE, and of course, His Excellency High Commissioner for Cyprus, Mr. Andreas Gargouris. Tonight's guest is Dame Janet Paraskeva, who will be interviewed by Tom Toumazis MBE. So I'll do a quick introduction for both Dame Janet and Tom, and then hand over to Tom for the fireside chat with Dame Janet. So Dame Janet was born in Newport, Wales in 1946 and began her career as a teacher, but soon found herself drawn towards the non-profit sector. And this was the beginning of a long and successful career in various public leadership roles. Her success kicked off in particular as Chief Executive of the Law Society of England and Wales, where she gained her national profile. Dame Janet was appointed the first Civil Service Commissioner by Prime Minister Tony Blair and served from 2006 to 2010, and then was appointed by David Cameron as one of the three members of an inquiry to determine whether British intelligence officers were complicit in torture of detainees. Dame Janet has also served as a non-executive director of the Serious Organised Crime Agency, chair of the Child Maintenance and Enforcement Commission, director for England of the National Lottery Charities Board, and chief executive of the National Youth Agency and Youth Bureau. She was honoured in the Queen's 2010 birthday honours and appointed a Dame Commander of the British Empire, and is a passionate campaigner for diversity and inclusion in society, and particularly for LGBTQ+ rights. I'm also delighted to introduce Tom Toumazis, who will be interviewing Dame Janet tonight. Tom has an extensive portfolio of directorships in technology, media, and the arts, and is a founder, investor, and chair of startups across several industries. He has held senior roles in the film and entertainment industry at ITV, the Walt Disney Company, Eurosport, Endemol Shine, and Yahoo. Tom is also a trustee of the NSPCC and has raised vast amounts of money for Childline. He is a frequent public speaker, sharing his work experiences and life story, mainly for school-age children, to inspire them as they think about their future careers. And he was awarded an MBE in 2015 for services to children. Tom, Janet, it's an honor to have you both tonight. Thank you very much for being with us. Tom, over to you.
Christos, thanks very much. Good afternoon to everybody. To you, the High Commissioner, thank you for joining us. And to you, Janet. Now, Janet, we know each other a little bit. We've known each other for a few years through a family connection. My mother-in-law is your first cousin. And we go back a few years, and in fact we've also come across each other through the Cypriot Federation and helping to support Cypriot businesses and also help inspire young Cypriots. So let's try and make this relaxed, because this is a Sunday and I feel relaxed. I hope you do. I want us to take a journey through your early life and your career. Talk about some of the things that you've achieved. But I have to say right at the top, I have never seen a resume that stretched to 5 pages. I mean, give something for the rest of us to try and achieve. There is just so much here. You are seriously not just a Cypriot treasure. You are a British treasure. You are an inspiration to all of us. And outside of your career achievements, a mother of 2, a grandmother of 3, a step-grandmother of 5, the damehood has already been referred to. And by the way, you are a member of the Privy Council, as well as many other things. I also noted that you chaired the appointment process for the sponsorship board to lead the restoration and renewal program of the Palace of Westminster. I mean, that's just enough for one person in their lifetime, and that's what you did in 2018. Some other incredible achievements you established through Plan UK, a major campaign against early forced marriage, and female genital mutilation through its Girls Campaign. You were a magistrate, you were a council member of Childline, and the list goes on and on and on. So, I mean, an incredible career, and you keep on going, and you are incredibly active. Not only do we reflect on your achievements of the past, which we will walk through at some pace, but let's go back to post-war Britain, 1946. In fact, let's go back a little bit further to the early 1930s and talk about Andonis, your father, and Doris, your mother, and your Cypriot heritage. Your father was born in Neda, a tiny village of about 150, 200 people in the Carpathia Peninsula near Yalusa, and came to the UK in the early 30s. In fact, you know, one of the very early Cypriots, if you think there's 300,000 Cypriots here in the UK, that was probably one of the very early settlers that came over. Am I right in thinking that he intended to come to the UK as a pit stop? I mean, that wasn't his long-term plan.
One of the many stories he told us was that he was really on his way to America, but like a lot of people, found work and indeed his wife in London. But yes, he was one of that very early group. I think there were only about 1,000 Cypriots in London at about the time that he came, and it must have been a very different place for them then. It was.
He met Doris. He met Doris in London.
They met in London. I think it was in 1937 they met, and I think that it was at a royal procession. And depending on who you listen to, Mum says Dad was lost, and he helped her find her way home. And Dad says Mum was lost. You know, it's one of those conversations where they both agree to disagree on who found who, but actually they found each other. Was the long and the short of it.
And instead of maintaining his plan and taking your mother to the States, they changed their plan, decided to go to Newport, where Doris was born.
Yep.
And I guess was he the only Greek in the Newport village for quite some time? And how cosmopolitan was Newport in the 40s and 50s?
Well, Newport was a port, and so in fact there were quite a lot of different ethnic groups there, relatively speaking, anyway. But actually there weren't very many Greek Cypriots there, and indeed they married in Cardiff, it was Cardiff that we went to the Greek church, because there wasn't a Greek church in Newport. So my sister and I, because my brother was too tiny at the time, were taken off. Not every week, but certainly to the major festivals, to the Greek Orthodox Church in Cardiff, which I must say was a bit of a surprise to two little girls from Newport, suddenly finding themselves together with all of the women on one side of the church, and Dad, of course, just left us because off he went to be with all the men. And that was, in a way, our first immersion into one aspect of Greek Cypriot life.
So that's your brother Christopher, your sister Susan. So three of you growing up in Newport.
Yeah.
You tell us a little bit about your early memories of childhood, and I think I'm right in saying also your father was a cook, and was he the kind of the cook of the family? Did you get served a lot of Greek cuisine as you were growing up?
We did, and some of it, of course, we knew was ordinary. But of course, you know, if you serve avgomemoni, the rice is very soggy, and other people didn't have rice like that, so there were sometimes conversations with friends about what food should really look like, because our food sometimes was rather different. But yes, he was the cook in the family. He was a restaurateur in Newport, and then in fact we all moved to Hastings when I was about 12, 13. And he opened a restaurant there and was quite successful. Going to Hastings was quite an upheaval. And for me, it was the first time that I had really realized that my dad was a Greek Cypriot, and that made me something different. Because children aren't always very kind to each other. And they were not very kind about my dad's accent. Or indeed about me, and left horrid notes in the desk. And so there was something there that I experienced for the first time, which I know a lot of people experience in different ethnic groups far greater discrimination than I felt, in fact.
Did you get a sense that that discrimination impacted the way in which teachers saw you, the education system saw you? I mean, you know, clearly from your career, you are an incredibly intelligent person, and you've shown that through so many twists and turns. But, you know, being young was in many regards you and your father's background seen as a negative contribution rather than what we should all think of as a positive contribution?
It was certainly difficult when it came to doing A-levels and then what I would do after that, because I was told very clearly by my head teacher that even though I got A's and B's for my A-levels and could easily have got into university, that university wasn't for me. My dear, as she spoke to me, your father doesn't speak English. Dad spoke English. He had a heavy accent, but that was the reason given to me for her not recommending a university as a place for somebody like me. So I went to teacher training college and enjoyed it, I have to say, and became a teacher. And
studied biological sciences, taught maths.
Yeah, taught maths and science for a few years, and before I had my children, and then got into youth work and stayed working with young people, but in a much less formal setting.
And did you enjoy? I mean, you spent, I think, 3 years as a teacher. Did you enjoy being a teacher?
Yeah, I did, and assumed I would always be a teacher. At that time, thought my ambition would be to be a head teacher. I loved it. I loved the classroom, and always intended to go back. It was just that other opportunities came along.
And you married your husband, Alan. He was a teacher. Did you meet through school? Were you both teaching at the same time?
I met him at teacher training college. So.
Oh, right. So you were both studying at the same time?
No, he was my physics tutor.
Okay. Okay. And so I think Alan was involved in youth clubs. And tell us a little bit about how you moved from teaching, the formal teaching of sciences, into managing youth clubs.
It's a bit how I got into youth work, really, because when we moved, because he became a deputy head, and we moved and lived in a village just outside Coventry, and we'd only been there a very short while, and a knock came on the door saying, "Oh, saying to Alan, we hear you're the deputy head. We really need some help with the local youth club. How about it?" And Alan had just taken on a new, rather large job, and I could hear him saying, you know, wanting to be supportive, but actually saying, I really haven't got the time. So I piped up from the background and said, but I have. In the evenings, you can look after the kids, and I'll go and run a youth club. And that's how I got into youth clubs work, and never looked back from there.
And how did you get to running things? I mean, what was I have a theory that actually working in your dad's restaurant and being, if you like, being exposed to customers, the pressure of the kitchen, just-in-time delivery, all of those characteristics that exist in a restaurant are an amazing learning ground for people. I certainly learned a lot from it. I just wonder whether did you pick up a lot more than you thought you would from being thrust into that environment? Was that helpful?
I suppose when I think about that question, I suppose the whole business of how you treat customers, how you treat people who are expecting something from you. I think you learn that very, very quickly when actually you're serving meals and collecting meals from them. So, that is something that happens, I think, that you do learn and take away.
And working with young people, can you just tell us a little bit more about what it was you were doing in those early years after you left, formally being a teacher? Yeah,
I did start working with young people. I did some detached work. My first encounter with the police was when I was working with a group of young people. We were actually sitting in a pub garden on the wall talking, and police came down and actually said, "What are you lot all doing here? We're going to take you off to question you." And I said, "Excuse me, officer." And all his answer was, "And you with the mouse," in the van. That was my very first experience. And we were all taken off to the police station, actually treated very gently when we got there, but we all had to find our way back home again. But it was a case of I was among a group of young people, talking to them, listening to their problems, trying to sort some of them out. And clearly that was frowned on at the time. But it was a case of suddenly, and for the very first time, experiencing what a lot of young people experience when they're just misunderstood for hanging around together.
I mean, you've got in your career many examples of standing up for the voice that doesn't have the ability to be able to speak and represent itself in the right way. Where did that come from, Janet? Tell us about, you know, what were your influences as you were growing up that you took with you?
I don't know that there was any one single thing. I think there were a number of things when I look back, and certainly being told you can't go to university, leaves you with a feeling of, well, but I can do something. And actually it puts a little bit of fight in your belly, I think, to fight back. I think I was trusted with opportunities in a number of jobs. You asked about how I learned I could run organizations, because I've spent a lot of time doing that. And it was simply because my boss at the time at the National Association of Youth Clubs sent me off to fix an organization that was broken, where people had embezzled money and it needed sorting out. And I found that I could do it. It actually wasn't that hard. You could see quite clearly what needed to be done, and you just got on with it. And I learned then that that was something I could do, and others saw that I could do it, and I was given other opportunities. And
in the early part of your career, civil roles, civic roles, non-for-profit organizations. Susan, your sister, took a career in teaching. Your late brother Christopher began his career, I think, in as a probation officer. You were all three characteristically doing things for the community. You were putting stuff in. And you know, we look at a lot of Cypriots and we see a lot of careers of Cypriots, and of course Cypriots have put an enormous amount into British society. But it's an interesting thread that all three of you decided to take those kind of course in careers. When you were all together talking about it, what did you come up as the reason why you all decided to go into similar fields?
I don't think we spotted anything that was common. That was just something about who we were and the kinds of things that we wanted to do and contribute. And I don't think any of us, although of course everybody wants to be able to afford the things that, you know, make our lives pleasant. That wasn't our prime driver. Our prime driver were the kind of roles that we went into, and they were teaching and social work and probation work.
And did Dad want you to get into, or any of you to take over the restaurant business? It was a successful business in Hastings.
I think he would have loved it if my brother had done that, but he didn't want to do that. He wanted to go and, like the rest of us, you know, forge out his own career. And
so you're in the early stages of your career. You're married. You have two daughters, Sue, who's a potter, and Amanda, who took the teaching career route. You established youth clubs around the country. You are a founder president of the Confederation of Youth Clubs. You're chair of the British Youth Council, and you still wanted, former chair, you still wanted to do more. And you decided to go back to school or go back to university.
I did an open university degree. That's right, I did. Sometimes you just get fed up with people telling you haven't got a degree. But it wasn't just that, although it was hard not to have a chip on your shoulder. It was also because I really wanted to read around some of the things that I'd been learning and doing in practice, and to read what other people had said about it, and what research there was, and what evidence there was about the kind of work that we were dealing with. And one of the disciplines, of course, for doing that is study. And so I signed up to the Open University and really enjoyed it.
And did you know what you wanted to do with it, Janet? I mean, you know, it's, a full-time job, two children, and I guess Open University at the time was actually watching quite a lot of it. I remember it as a kid. It was on BBC Two through the night.
Yeah, that's right.
Is that the way you studied?
That's right. Yeah, and it was hard in that you didn't exactly have a lot of free time. But it wasn't a case of what do I want to do with it. You know, there's something about education for education's sense, you know, actually wanting to learn more and understand more. about the roles that you have. And I just think that's something that I hope never goes from the ambition of children and their parents. You know, education does change things.
And I mean, let's go to 95, because I think I see 95 as a big career move for you, the first director of National Lotteries Charities Board. I mean, that is a big thing. And you've got a reputation in setting things up. You like clean sheets of paper. You like to it seems as though you like to draw things and design things and start things from you. I mean, they are really hard. They're very, very difficult. What was it like distributing grants to charitable organizations, tens of thousands of them over your time there? Tell us a little bit about that.
It was a tremendous job, and it was, of course, we were setting it up completely from scratch. There wasn't a grant system in place, and yet there were millions and millions of pounds being generated through the National Lottery. And so we really did have to start from scratch. We had no offices. We took over 2 floors in a hotel in central London. We had no filing cabinets. We went to a major DIY store and bought great green tubs to put the files in, and then in order to set something up in England, divided England up into its regions. And I actually had teams of people working for each region, so that we could, when the applications came in, immediately allocate them to a regional team to be processed. And a lot of young people, of course, came to work for us, and many of them were young people who'd come to England just to study for a year or two, because we needed people who were prepared to work, didn't mind the long hours, because we worked very long hours. We had them on shifts and fed them pizza and Coca-Cola to keep going, because we really had a timetable of trying to deliver grants at the first anniversary of the lottery, and which we did. I learned an enormous amount. I never ever thought I would see myself walking around 2 floors of a hotel with a clipboard saying, can I have 2 more in Yorkshire and Humber, please? And another 17 over in the Southwest. And I felt like I was running a factory in that first year, simply because of the volume of applications that we got. But, you know, over those years, we managed to get money to some larger organizations, but importantly, to local community groups who'd never had a grant before. And that was the real purpose of what was the National Lottery Charities Board in those days. Any special
moments during your time there of charities that really, you know, continue to resonate with you?
Indeed. One of the things we got into terrible trouble with in the Red Top Papers was because, of course, we also funded programs for working with young gay men, and in particular young gay men they didn't like, and they. The story goes that Number 10 wanted Maastricht off the front pages of the newspapers, and so they put our grants on the front pages instead. And indeed, of course, the balloon went up. Public money being used to work with street boys. And our chairman, Sir David Seath, Lord Seath, had actually been a very senior member of the government, and was absolutely and rightly furious to suddenly find the organisation that he was chairing being treated in that way. And he became the greatest supporter for the underprivileged access to money overnight. And so actually what turned out as something really difficult to cope with, I think opened his eyes to the way in which people who are having difficulty trying to get cash need help and need support, and he became a really tremendous supporter of getting those community grants out where they were most needed.
And how long did you stay in that role?
I was in that role about 6 years, I think 6, and of course then split the England operation up into regional offices, so that the grants could really be made by committees in the regions rather than in London.
Right. Okay. So, you know, distribution of power and influence back into the regions. By the way, Christos is going to mark me down. I should have said at the top of the top of the call, if you do have any questions, please post them on the live chat, and we'll get to them during the course of the conversation. Okay. So a successful 6-7 years in charitable giving and building something. Let's talk about the Law Society. Let's go to the year 2000, because I think what strikes me at the Law Society, you became much more of a public figure. This was a very high profile job. I think it was described in the media as the worst job in the country.
It was, yes.
Okay, so Janet Paraskeva takes the worst job in the country. Why?
Why not? Nobody else had managed to fix it. If I didn't succeed, I would just be somebody else that tried and failed, or I might succeed. And
now,
so I gave it a go.
Now you'd already built and developed a successful career. You didn't need the risk of failure. There was a lot riding on the job. But I also want to talk a little bit about the publicity and the public nature of the role. I mean, you had come out as a gay woman, and you were with a partner. You've been in a long-term relationship with Mary, I think now for 25 years. Mm-hmm. It wasn't as though you were hiding your sexuality and who you were, but the press were beginning to pick on that side of it, it seems.
The press, it was quite extraordinary, actually, because I'd been living openly as a gay woman with a partner, bringing up kids. But they then suddenly, it was actually the storyline came out of the charity work, because I jumped from there into the Law Society. And I only knew that they were onto me because the neighbour phoned up and said, "Do you realise there's a man on your garden wall with a long lens camera?" And I looked and saw indeed there was. And of course, what they were trying to do was to get a story. The interesting thing was the two stringers involved spent a lot of time telephoning friends and colleagues, asking, "Is she gay? Is she lesbian?" And they all said, "Mind your own business. What's that got to do with you?" Even though we were living openly and it wasn't a secret. So in the end, there was almost a full-page spread all about me with a photograph of the children, the house I lived in. Not a single mention of sexuality, because they couldn't prove it. And all they had to do was to actually to have gone back a year or two to when the 4 kids and we were living all together in Hackney and having a very straightforward life. And it was right under their noses. And
right under their noses, right under their noses. And I'd love you to share a little bit more about you and the moment you came out and you shared that news. I mean, I think for a lot of gay people, that's a very significant moment. And how did that play out when you told your father?
Well, I told my father when we, partner and I went to visit him, and he just said, "How many beds?" And I said, "1." And he said, "Humph." And that was it. And he was fine, absolutely fine. He was very straightforward about it, actually. And I think many parents would be if they were given the chance to be. But of course, it's hard to know how and what. And actually, he took the decision of what to say away from me by asking that very, very straightforward question. And that was very typical of him, actually. He went straight to the nub of things. He didn't beat about the bush, sometimes be a bit tricky. But on that occasion, it was actually quite healthy.
And I think it's important we talk about these things, Janet, because I think you can inspire and give confidence to other people to make difficult decisions, whatever they are in their life, because you've shown it time and time again. And your sexuality is just one example of the challenges that you've faced sometimes in the public domain, because you are a public figure. And I hope that people have appreciated the way in which you've conducted yourself over a very successful career, but also how you've I think when you think of equality, diversity and inclusion today, gosh, 25 years ago, you were right at the vanguard and forefront of it.
Yeah, and sometimes I used to get a bit fed up. Why every time I was interviewed did they have to say, "Oh, and you're in the pink list," and "Oh, and you're a lesbian," and you just think, why? Why can't they just talk about the work that I'm doing? And it was a Spectator article that I remember thinking that the article was really interesting. It was about my job in Whitehall. But there in the middle of it was the fact that the year before I'd been in the pink list of leading figures, I think it was at the time. And I thought, oh, here we go again, you know. And then a couple of weeks later, I got a letter from a very, very senior civil servant who said, thank you so much for coming out in that newspaper article in that way. Although I hadn't come out in the article, but it was represented in the article. He said, it gave me courage to come out, and I'm 55. And I just thought, okay, there is a point. There is a point in actually just being clear that actually this is who we are, something to be proud of, something to celebrate, and not hide.
So you took what was considered one of the toughest jobs and one of the worst jobs in the country. How did you go about fixing it? What were the things that you remember were kind of important milestones in surviving successfully and transforming the Law Society?
Well, when I went there, it was a bit of a broken organisation, and in fact they were in the red by some considerable amount of money. So the first thing I had to do was to find out where the money was going. So I called in every order over £5,000. What I hadn't realised in my naivety is just how many of them there would be, and I was of course totally flooded with paper. But it enabled me to see why there had been no central control over the cash and why people weren't being fraudulent, but lots of it was being spent in all sorts of different ways without any real accountability. I then had to go about absolutely making sure that I had the right team with me to work. Nobody does these things on their own. I know everybody says that, but it's for real. And I needed some of the people who'd been part of the organisation and some fresh blood. So my senior team was a mix of people who'd been part of the organisation when it got damaged, and people who would help me put it right. And of course, one of the big difficulties and one of the troubles that the Law Society had got itself into was that it hadn't managed to handle the complaints from people about their solicitors. And there was an enormous backlog, and the government was threatening to take away self-regulation. And so we had to work very, very hard with government to explain and help them understand what we were doing to get rid of the backlog, to set up processes where the complaints could be handled more efficiently, and allow self-regulation to continue, albeit with a much greater separation from the representative role that the Law Society then had. So it was a complex set of activities. But again, you know, I think somebody once said I was a good crap detector. And I think it is, if I had one skill, I think it is about being able to look at something and saying, actually, that's where it's wrong there. That's the bit you need to put right, just there. What I had to learn, actually, was to say, and that bit you've done really well, and thank you for doing that. Because if you can spot the things that are wrong, you sometimes forget to say to the people who are doing the things which are right, that that's really important. And that's one of the greatest things I think I've learned in my career, is not to forget to say thank you, and that's really good. And what you're doing is really special.
And you spent six years there. I mean, yep. Tell us a little bit about your decision to move on. It's a long time in a very tough job, but you can just stop there. I know we'll talk a little bit about your next tough gig, but your choice of timing.
Well, the mending of the organisation meant that I was separating out representation from regulation, albeit within the same umbrella. So I effectively split my job into three, with the Office of Legal Complaints, the Solicitors Regulatory Authority, and the Law Society as the representative body. And I decided that actually I didn't want to do a third of my job. And so I went off, and I was 60, I think, by that time as well. Thought it was time for a change. And to look at a portfolio career, I think it's called these days. And so that was the moment that I changed tack.
And so you tell us about the civil service and being the first civil service commissioner, because that sounds like another tough gig. Is it as tough as it sounds, you had to lead the establishment in law of the civil service and its code of ethics. And your objective was to develop an effective and impartial civil service. Just remind us, how many employees are there in the civil service?
Thousands and thousands and thousands, but I wasn't responsible for all of those. I was responsible really for the senior roles in Whitehall. And I was privileged to work with Sir Gus O'Donnell, Lord O'Donnell now, as the Cabinet Secretary. And working closely with the Cabinet Secretary, you can achieve quite a bit, because one of the ways in which you bring about the kind of change we were looking for was to make sure that the right people were appointed on merit to the permanent secretary roles in each of the departments. And the toughest bit of the gig was keeping the politicians out of it, because ministers wanted to pick their own permanent secretaries. And what was really important was that the civil service remained impartial. And I think that row actually continues today between ministers and civil servants. And of course, you can understand why you might want to choose your own senior person, but actually the whole point of the civil service is it's there to be impartial. The point of the politicians is to bring their policy initiatives. So you would be changing the nature of our independent civil service if in fact the top appointments became politicised, chosen by ministers. So a lot of the work that we did was to find ways of helping ministers understand that, helping them be involved in sometimes not interviewing at all, but sometimes by meeting final shortlisted candidates. And then if there were any concerns about any of them, they were able to raise that. I would go and see the Secretary of State, and he or she was able to raise those concerns with me. And then in the process of the interview, we could explore them, so that if somebody was appointed that was rather different than the Secretary of State might have imagined, we could at least explain that we had gone through all of their concerns with the candidate and assure the minister that actually this was the person who on merit was the right person for the job. And of course, when you look at merit, actually one of the things that happens is a lot of women come through. If you look at the old boy network and who went to which school with who, the same old chaps turn up. And actually we went from one woman as a permanent secretary to 9 in the time that I was there. And that was simply because we put in place a proper system for recruitment on merit.
I mean, Janet, have you ever had the ambition to get involved in politics? You've seemed to have been selected for a number of very prominent projects from both leaders, from prime ministers from both sides of the political divide. I mean, I don't know what your political flavour is, but is that something you've ever felt that you wanted to get involved in?
I don't think I've ever really seriously thought of being a politician. I've had lots of conversations with people about it, but people have said, why not? What about it? I think the difficulty of signing up to one political party or another, whatever they do, and being loyal to whichever decisions they take, isn't the kind of place I want to be. I would prefer to stand away from that kind of partisan discipline and look to see and to listen to what each party has got to say and support the party that I believe actually has the kind of is carrying out the kind of actions that I believe I can sign up to. But not all parties do everything that you want them to do.
Yeah. Listen, we've got a question from Lena on the chat. I'm going to read it as it comes. If you had the opportunity to turn back time, would you have chosen to, I think it says live, but I think come outside the closet?
Would I have chosen to?
Yeah, would you have chosen to come out of the closet? I mean, I think the question is more about would you have well, you have, I think.
I think for me, in a sense, it was almost. I learned about it when I was an inspector in Ilia, and I worked with a lot of women, many of whom were lesbians, and we worked together trying to establish things like women's self-defense on the adult education agenda. And so I was surrounded by women who were out, and that made it much, much easier, actually, to just get on and be who you were. So there wasn't for me, it didn't although you did come out, those were the phrases used, it didn't really feel like opening the closet door.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that for many people, they can feel very shut in by not being able to talk and work. But I had the real luck and privilege of working with some just really lovely women, some of whom were lesbians, and they were having a great life.
We haven't spoken much about your family, and I'm curious about your work-life balance. It's a question that we always pose a lot to busy people. How did you manage all of those things, and how do you cope with that? Tell us a little bit about your two daughters. How did they cope with a very busy mother?
I think it must have been very hard for them, because a lot of the time I was at work. And Alan was a great dad. He was a very, very good dad, and he was dad and mum to them quite a lot of the time. When I had to do international trips, my mother came sometimes to help look after them. But actually, keeping it all in balance is tricky. And if you're in any kind of partnership, whether it's a straight partnership or a gay partnership, then actually getting that balance right isn't easy. It is tricky, and it does introduce all sorts of tensions, of course. And I think it must have been very hard for the girls at sometimes when their mum just wasn't there because she was working.
Yeah. And one more question coming through from Gnosulla Chupra-Lewis, a good friend of mine. Thank you, Gnosulla, for asking this question. Thank you for such an inspirational discussion. Janet, what piece of advice would you give to your younger self or to a young person starting their career now?
I don't know what I'd say to me, except don't always open your mouth before you've got your brain engaged. As I think to young people, it was a piece of advice that the first head teacher that I taught for, my very first teaching job, after I had my first meeting with her on the first morning, she said, "Good luck with it, and be inspirational, aspire to great things." She said, "Remember, if you want to achieve, aim for the sky. You might fall into the trees, but if you only aim for the trees, you land on the floor." And I think that's a kind of mantra, which I think I would say, to anybody, but particularly to young people, aim high. Sometimes you'll trip and crash. The higher you aim, the more likely you are to be in the treetops.
I mean, you're still active now, Janet. You're still doing stuff. What's keeping you? I've got the resume, but what are the things that you're excited about? And is there a memoir in plan here? I mean, you should write a book about your journey.
No, I'm not going to write my memoir. I'm doing three things at the moment. I'm doing the kind of job I did in Whitehall down in Jersey, so chairing appointments commissions there and making sure that the right people get the jobs, they get them on merit. I chair a legal organisation called the Council for Licensed Conveyancers, and that's lawyers who do conveyancing. And I also chair the Standards and Regulation Board for the Royal Institute for Chartered Surveyors. And that's really exciting, because there, again, I'm using the kind of skills I know, but actually having to learn about a whole different industry. And at this time when environmental planning and sustainability are so important to the future, that feels a very exciting place to be.
And 2010, a big year. You received your damehood in 2010. You were appointed, I think, to the Privy Council, and the great and the good of British politics, the judiciary and Whitehall are part of the Privy Council. That must be one hell of a Christmas party. What did that feel like to be invited to the Privy Council?
It was pretty special. And when you have an MBE, it's quite special when you go to the palace to get your gong. When I was made a dame, that was special. But the day you go to the Privy Council, there aren't very many of you there at all, and you take the oath with the Queen. You take 2 oaths with the Queen, and you really do feel suddenly part of history, part of something that's been going on for a very long, very, very long time, and something very special. And it did mean something very special. It does mean something very special.
Is there something that you're most proud of, Janet? If you kind of look at all the achievements that you've managed to accumulate over a wonderful personal and professional career. Tell us what comes to mind.
The immediate things that comes to mind, funnily enough, is that my kids survived it all. And they're both very successful, and they have I have three grandsons who are, I hope, also going to go on to achieve great things, and I'm sure they will. But actually, because it was also very difficult, that they came through it, it's down to them as well. But I think looking back, the kids survived and have gone on to be successful.
And why don't I ask you this last question about being Cypriot and what being a British-born Cypriot means to you. Tell us a little bit about how you feel about being Cypriot, because clearly it's been a very significant influence in your life. Your mother and father both play a key role, but Andonis, from where he started, he must look down and be both your parents be incredibly proud of what you've achieved.
Yeah, and being Cypriot is important, and it has been a strain through all my life. But there's a sense in which the older I get, the more Cypriot I feel, and some of that has to do, I think, with now being in touch with the Cypriot Association and seeing and listening to what you're trying to achieve, and thinking, I wish that I had been able to be in touch more with more Cypriots as I was going through my career. So actually being part of something that is really trying to bring people together, inspire them, make them realise that being Cypriot is something to be proud of. Even my daughter is proud. My daughters are proud of being part Cypriot. And one of my grandsons asked, "Can I say I'm part Cypriot too?" And I said, "Yep, you can. That heritage is there." And I've got a lovely photograph of the oldest grandson with me, my daughter, and my dad. And that I was able to say, there it is. There's the Cypriot strain. There's the 4 generations.
Well, if Frank Sinatra's anthem "My Way" applies to anybody, it's to you, Janet, because you have really you've created a path and driven an enormous amount of change through your personal and professional career. I'm going to pause there and pass it over to the High Commissioner for some closing comments. Thank you so much. I mean, given that I knew a little bit about you and we've known each other for a few years, I had no idea how seriously I should have taken those very early conversations. I should have paid a bit more attention. You were just sitting to my right. I should have done a bit more homework. So this
all the weddings and funerals we sat together in.
I know funerals as well. But it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your story. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Dame Janet, this was absolutely incredible listening to your story. I had the pleasure of speaking to you yesterday evening, so we did speak about a few things. But your career, which is still going on, is an inspiration to everybody. Your personal life, your professional life, and how you've dealt with it, and has been an absolute inspiration, I think, to many. And I take your last point, because it's what we talked about yesterday evening, about the pride of having that Cypriot heritage as well, and wanting to connect. And I think if it's one thing that we would both agree with, there is so much more that collectively and individually as a community we can do. I've often said this, that we are a community that has incredibly bright, successful people. We need to know about them.
Yeah.
We need to join those dots. And I think this effort by the National Federation and Christos and his team is something that we should congratulate them for, because it is bringing people together. It is allowing, firstly, myself and so many others to find out about Cypriots, BBCs, those of Cypriot heritage who are over here, who have been as successful as they are, and who can be an inspiration. I very much hope to, as I said, work with you to see how we can join those dots and make this community punch above its weight.
Absolutely.
Because it is a community that deserves to be seen. It has a voice. It needs to have a a loud voice. You are one example of that. Tom, you yourself are another example, and so many others. So tonight has been an absolute privilege to hear your story. Look forward to working with you, and I'd like to again, from my vantage point as High Commissioner, say how proud I am of being part of this community over here. It's my community where I was born and raised, and when we talk about the community, I feel very much part of that. And I wish everybody success. Christo, thank you again for putting tonight together. Tom, great fireside chat, conversation. I think you're a pro at this, so we'll have to see how we can use you on other occasions too. But thank you, Janet. Thank you, Tom, Christo, and to everybody that's signed in. It has been a most enjoyable 1 hour, and I've learnt a lot and look forward to continuing. Thank you.
Thank you.
My Commissioner, thank you very much for those kind words. And as he said, Tom, brilliant job. You told Janet's story brilliantly. And Dame Janet, thank you very much for kind of taking us through your journey and your life story, and for responding to our outreach to kind of get in touch with the Federation and engage with us. And I think, to all those people who tuned in, thank you very much, despite the sunny weather, for tuning in with us virtually. And we do plan, when we can, to do much more of this live and in person. So when circumstances permit, we will be doing an in-person event where you can actually get to meet people in person. But for the time being, we're virtual. So thank you very much all for giving up your time tonight. Have a good evening.